The hunger that saved her. Clara Hayes stood in the doorway of Mercer's General Store with her last 3 coins clutched in her palm and her daughter, dying, in her arms. 4-year-old Lily hadn't cried in 2 days, hadn't spoken, hadn't moved except to breathe in shallow, terrifying whispers against Clara's collarbone. The store owner's wife crossed her arms over her chest and said the words that would echo in Clara's nightmares. "We don't give charity to women like you." Outside, the February wind cut through Colorado like a knife, and Clara understood with perfect, horrible clarity that her child would not survive another night. What happened next would change 3 lives forever, but first, it would break them all wide open. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Clara and Lily's story travels. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and stay until the end. You won't regret it. The town of Silver Peak had the particular cruelty of a place that was dying but wouldn't admit it. The silver veins had run thin 2 years ago, and now the mines coughed up more dust than ore. Men left in the night with their families, abandoning leases and debts, leaving behind houses that slowly came apart in the wind. The ones who stayed grew meaner with every passing month, as if suffering were a competition and kindness a luxury no one could afford. Clara had learned this the hard way. She stood now on the wooden sidewalk outside Mercer's, the afternoon sun doing nothing to warm the air, watching her breath cloud white in front of her face. Lily's weight against her chest had become frighteningly light. The child's lips were cracked and pale, her eyes half closed, her small body limp as a rag doll. "Please," Clara whispered, though there was no one left to hear her. The door to the general store had closed with a decisive click moments ago, and through the window she could see Mrs. Mercer turning her back, her movements sharp with judgment. Clara's husband had been dead for 6 weeks. Thomas Hayes had taken a lung fever in January and was gone before the first thaw. The mining company had given her 3 days to vacate company housing. 3 days to pack what she could carry and find somewhere, anywhere, to go. There had been nowhere. The boarding houses wouldn't take a woman with a child and no income. The church had offered prayers but no shelter. Her only living relative was Thomas's brother Jacob, who'd made it clear during the funeral that he had no intention of supporting Thomas's mistakes. That's what he'd called them. Clara and Lily, both. Mistakes. So she'd taken a room above the old tannery, a space so small she could touch both walls when she stretched out her arms, with a roof that leaked and a window that wouldn't close. She'd spent her last real money on the first week's rent. After that, she'd sold everything she owned. Her wedding ring, her mother's cameo, Thomas's pocket watch, her winter cloak, even the quilt she'd brought from Missouri. The money had run out yesterday. She'd gone to every business in town this morning, asking for work. Any work. Washing, mending, cooking, cleaning, anything. The saloon keeper had looked her up and down with eyes that made her skin crawl, and offered her a job that made her stomach turn. She'd walked out without answering. By noon, she'd understood that Silver Peak had made its judgment. She was a woman alone, which meant she was either a burden or an opportunity for exploitation. There would be no honest work, no charity, no mercy. She'd come to Mercer's as a last resort, thinking perhaps she could beg for food scraps, the ends of bread loaves, bruised apples, anything. Mrs. Mercer had taken one look at Lily's hollow face and Clara's threadbare dress and said, "You should have thought about that child before you found yourself in this position." As if widowhood were a moral failing, as if hunger were a choice. Clara closed her eyes and pressed her cheek against Lily's hair. The child's breathing was so faint she had to concentrate to feel it. In her arms, her daughter was slipping away, and Clara was powerless to stop it. "Mama," Lily whispered, the first word she'd spoken since morning. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." "I'm cold." Clara's heart cracked down the center. I know you are." She had nothing left to sell, nothing left to beg with. The room above the tannery was paid through tomorrow, and after that they'd be on the street. Winter wasn't finished with Colorado. There would be more snow, more wind, more nights that could kill. She should move, should walk, should do something. But her legs wouldn't cooperate, and her mind had gone numb with despair, and all she could do was stand there on the sidewalk holding her dying daughter and trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. The sound of boots on wood broke through her paralysis. Clara opened her eyes and saw him coming down the street. A man so tall he seemed to block out the sun, broad-shouldered and dark-haired, moving with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to prove anything to anyone. He wore a heavy coat that looked warm, gloves that looked new, and boots that had seen work but weren't worn through. Caleb Rowan. Clara had seen him in town before, though they'd never spoken. Everyone knew who he was, the rancher who lived alone up in the high country, who came to Silver Peak once a month for supplies and never stayed longer than necessary. There were stories about him, the way there were stories about anyone who kept to themselves. Some said he'd lost his family. Others said he'd never had one. A few claimed he'd killed a man in Wyoming and come to Colorado to disappear. What everyone agreed on was that Caleb Rowan was not a man to cross, and not a man who tolerated fools. He walked past Clara without seeming to notice her, climbed the steps to Mercer's, and pushed open the door. The bell above the frame chimed, bright and incongruous. Clara turned away. She needed to go back to the room, needed to wrap Lily in both their blankets and try to keep her warm through another night. Maybe in the morning she'd have the strength to figure out what came next. Maybe. The door to Mercer's opened again. Clara glanced back and found Caleb Rowan standing in the doorway, his hand still on the frame, his gaze locked directly on her. Not past her, not through her, on her. He looked at Lily's face, then at Clara's, and something shifted in his expression, something she couldn't quite name. His jaw tightened. His eyes, gray as winter sky, went hard. Then he turned and walked back into the store. Clara told herself it meant nothing. Men like Caleb Rowan didn't involve themselves in the problems of desperate women. She'd learned that lesson already. She shifted Lily's weight in her arms, preparing to leave, when the door opened a third time. Caleb emerged carrying 2 burlap sacks, both bulging with supplies. He came down the steps and crossed the sidewalk in 4 long strides, stopping directly in front of Clara. Up close, he was even larger than she'd realized, 6.5 feet at least, with shoulders that could carry a full-grown steer. His face was weathered from sun and wind, lined at the corners of his eyes, his jaw shadowed with dark stubble. He looked like he'd been carved from the mountains themselves. "Your daughter," he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel underfoot. "How long since she ate?" Clara's throat closed. She couldn't speak. "Ma'am," he said, gentler this time. "How long?" 2 days, Clara managed. "Almost 3. He muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse. Then he set down the sacks, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a small paper-wrapped parcel. He unwrapped it carefully, peppermint sticks, 6 of them, the kind sold at the counter for a penny each. "Does she like sweets?" he asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Caleb broke off a piece of peppermint, small enough for a child's mouth, and held it out. "May I?" It took Clara a moment to understand he was asking permission. She nodded again. He crouched down, an enormous man folding himself small, and brought the peppermint close to Lily's face. "Hey there, little one," he said, his voice dropping to something unexpectedly soft. "I've got something for you. Think you can take it?" Lily's eyes opened, just barely. She looked at the candy, then at the man holding it, and Clara felt her daughter's body shift slightly, the first real movement she'd made in hours. "Go on," Caleb murmured. "It's yours." Lily's lips parted. Caleb placed the peppermint on her tongue with the care of a man handling something infinitely precious. Clara watched her daughter's mouth close around it, watched her begin to suck weakly, watched a tiny bit of color start to return to her face. Caleb straightened, his eyes meeting Clara's. "When'd you eat last?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Clara looked away. "Yesterday morning." "Jesus." He picked up the sacks again. "Come on." "Where?" "Inside. You need food, and that child needs more than peppermint." "Mr. Mercer won't." "Yes, he will." Caleb's voice carried absolute certainty. "Come on." He walked back toward the store without checking to see if she'd follow. Clara stood frozen for a heartbeat, her mind screaming warnings about strange men and offers too good to be true, about the price that always came attached to male generosity. But Lily had stopped shivering. The peppermint was working, sugar hitting her empty stomach, giving her body something to burn. Clara followed him inside. The warmth of the store hit her like a wall. A cast iron stove radiated heat from the corner, and the air smelled like coffee and tobacco and leather. Mr. Mercer stood behind the counter, his face carefully neutral. Mrs. Mercer had disappeared into the back room. Caleb set his sacks on the counter and turned to Clara. "Set her down," he said, nodding toward a chair near the stove. Clara did, lowering Lily carefully onto the seat. The child kept the peppermint in her mouth, her eyes tracking Caleb's movements. "Mercer," Caleb said, his tone conversational but edged with something that made the store owner straighten. "I need milk, fresh if you've got it. If bread, the soft kind, butter, honey, eggs, cheese, jerky, apples." Mercer cleared his throat. "Mr. Rowan, I'm not asking you to think. I'm asking you to fill the order. The lady doesn't have, I'm paying." Caleb pulled out a leather wallet thick with bills. "Now get moving." The store owner's eyes widened slightly. Then he nodded and began gathering items from the shelves. Clara's hands trembled. "Mr. Rowan, I can't accept." "You're not accepting. I'm giving. There's a difference." "I have no way to repay you." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Did I ask for repayment?" "No, but then there's nothing to discuss." Mercer brought the items to the counter, a glass bottle of milk still cold from the ice house, a round loaf of bread wrapped in brown paper, a small crock of butter, a jar of honey, a dozen eggs packed in straw, a wedge of yellow cheese, strips of dried beef, 4 red apples. Caleb paid without haggling, then turned to Lily. "You think you can drink some milk?" The child nodded, her eyes enormous in her thin face. He opened the bottle, poured milk into a tin cup Mercer provided, and brought it to her. "Slow," he cautioned. "Just a little at a time. Too fast and you'll get sick." Lily took the cup in both hands and sipped. Clara watched her daughter drink, watched her swallow, watched her take another sip, and felt something break loose in her chest, a sob she'd been holding back for weeks. She turned away quickly, pressing her hand to her mouth, trying to keep quiet. But her shoulders shook, and tears spilled hot down her cheeks, and she couldn't stop them. A hand touched her shoulder, large, warm, solid. "It's all right," Caleb said quietly. "Let it out." So she did. She stood there in Mercer's general store and cried while her daughter drank milk and ate bread with butter. And Caleb Rowan stood beside her like a wall against the world, his hand steady on her shoulder, not offering empty comfort or demanding explanations, just standing there, witnessing, holding space. When Clara finally got control of herself, she wiped her eyes with her sleeve and turned to face him. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For..." She gestured helplessly. "All of this? You've got nothing to apologize for." He studied her face for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Clara Hayes. This is Lily." "Caleb Rowan, but I expect you knew that." She nodded. "Where are you staying?" Clara hesitated, shame burning in her throat. "Above the tannery." His expression darkened. "That rat hole in February? It's all I could afford." "How long you been there?" 3 weeks. "And before that?" "Company housing. My husband worked the mines. He died in January." Caleb was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "You got family? Anyone who can help?" "No one who's willing." "Friends?" Clara laughed, the sound bitter. "This town's made it clear where I stand." He looked at Lily, who was nibbling a piece of cheese now, color gradually returning to her cheeks. "That child's starving, and you're not far behind. The tannery room won't keep you alive through March." "I know." Clara's voice cracked. "I know that, but I don't know what else to do. I've asked for work everywhere. No one will hire me, and even if they did..." She stopped, swallowing hard. "Even if they did, I can't work and watch her at the same time, and I can't leave her alone." "No," Caleb agreed. "You can't." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, thinking. Clara waited, her heart hammering. She didn't know what she was hoping for, didn't let herself hope for anything at all. Finally, he spoke. "I've got a ranch up in the high country. 3 hours' ride from here. It's remote. No neighbors, no town nearby. Just me and a couple hands who come through in summer. Right now, it's just me." Clara said nothing, afraid to interrupt. I need help, he continued. Cooking, cleaning, mending, garden work come spring. The place has gone to hell without... He stopped abruptly, his jaw working. Without someone to tend it. I can pay wages. Room and board included. Separate cabin for you and the girl, if you want privacy. Or a room in the main house if you'd rather. Clara stared at him. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a choice. His eyes met hers, steady and clear. Stay here and freeze, or come with me and work. Your call. You don't know anything about me. I know you'd rather starve than leave your daughter. I know you've got the sense to be afraid of strangers, but the courage to do what's necessary anyway. That's enough. People will talk. People always talk. I stopped listening years ago. Clara looked at Lily, who was eating an apple slice now, chewing slowly, her eyes brighter than they'd been in days. She thought about the room above the tannery, about the cold nights ahead, about the inevitable moment when her strength gave out completely. She thought about her daughter's breathing growing fainter. She thought about having nothing left to lose. All right, she whispered. All right. We'll come. Caleb nodded once, as if he'd expected nothing less. Good. We leave in an hour. That enough time to gather your things? We don't have much. Then it'll be easy. He handed her the sacks of food. Take these. Feed the girl. Meet me at the livery stable when you're ready. He paid Mercer for the milk and cup, tipped his hat to Clara, and walked out into the cold afternoon. Clara stood holding the sacks, feeling as if the world had tilted sideways. Lily looked up at her with milk on her upper lip and something like hope in her eyes. Mama, are we going somewhere? Clara knelt down and pulled her daughter close. Yes, baby, we're going somewhere safe. She prayed she wasn't lying. Annette. The room above the tannery took 10 minutes to pack. Clara folded their 2 dresses, their undergarments, their single blanket. She wrapped Lily's cloth doll, the only toy that hadn't been sold, in a spare petticoat. Everything fit into a canvas bag that had once held Thomas's mining tools. She looked around the room one last time. The stained mattress on the floor, the bucket in the corner that served as a chamber pot, the window that rattled in its frame. She'd been miserable here. Desperate, terrified. But at least it had been a roof. Now she was leaving with a man she didn't know, going to a place she'd never seen, trusting a stranger because the alternative was death. It was insane. It was also the only option she had. She picked up Lily, the child was stronger now, able to hold on, and carried her down the narrow stairs. The tannery owner was in his shop, scraping a hide. He didn't look up as they passed. The livery stable sat at the east end of town, a long building that smelled like hay and horse and manure. Clara found Caleb inside, saddling a massive black gelding that stood at least 17 hands high. This is Samson, he said, patting the horse's neck. He's steady, won't spook. A second horse waited nearby, already saddled, a smaller buckskin mare with a gentle eye. You ride? Caleb asked. Not well. You'll be fine. Daisy knows the way home. He finished tightening Samson's girth, then turned to face her. You're sure about this? Clara adjusted her grip on Lily. Are you? I don't offer things I'm not sure about. Then, yes, I'm sure. He nodded and took the canvas bag from her shoulder, securing it to Samson's saddle. Then he reached for Lily. May I? Clara hesitated only a second before handing her daughter over. Caleb lifted the child with the same careful gentleness he'd shown earlier, settling her in front of Samson's saddle. You hold on to the horn, all right? He told Lily. I'll be right behind you. You're safe. I know, Lily said, and Clara's throat tightened at the simple trust in her daughter's voice. Caleb mounted behind Lily, his long legs easily finding the stirrups. He looked down at Clara. You ready? Clara approached Daisy, eyeing the stirrup that seemed impossibly high. Caleb leaned down, offering his hand. Step on my boot. I'll pull you up. She did, and a moment later she was in the saddle, gripping the reins with hands that shook only slightly. Follow me, Caleb said. We'll take it slow. They rode out of Silver Peak just as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Clara looked back once and saw the town growing smaller behind them, the dying mines, the hostile faces, the place that had tried its best to kill her. Good riddance. She turned her face forward and followed Caleb Rowan into the wilderness, toward a future she couldn't see but had chosen anyway. The land opened up as they climbed, the road becoming a trail, the trail becoming a suggestion worn into rock and grass. Pine trees crowded close, their branches heavy with old snow. The air tasted like ice and stone. Lily fell asleep against Caleb's chest within the first hour. Clara watched him adjust his coat to shelter her, watched him slow Samson's pace to keep from jostling her. "She trusts you," Clara said. Caleb glanced at her. Children know things adults forget. They can feel intention. "And what does she feel from you?" "Safety, I hope." He was quiet for a moment. "She reminds me of my daughter." Clara's breath caught. The stories were true then. "You have a daughter?" "Had." His voice went flat. "She died 4 years ago. Fire took the house while I was out checking fence lines. Took her and my wife both." "I'm so sorry." It was a long time ago. But the way he said it, the careful emptiness in his tone, told Clara it would never be long enough. They rode in silence after that, climbing higher into country so remote Clara couldn't imagine anyone choosing to live there. But as the sun touched the peaks and turned the snow to gold, she began to understand the appeal. There was something clean about this emptiness, something honest. The land didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. It didn't judge, didn't lie. Just before full dark, they crested a ridge and Clara saw the ranch spread out below. A main house built from logs and river stone, smoke rising from the chimney. A barn, a chicken coop, a small cabin set apart from the main buildings. Fences marking pastures where horses grazed, dark shapes against white snow. It looked like something from a dream, solid, real, impossible. "Welcome home," Caleb said. Clara didn't correct him, didn't say that this wasn't her home, that she was just an employee, a temporary solution to his domestic problems. Because looking at that house with its warm lights and rising smoke, holding her daughter who'd come so close to dying, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start with. Caleb carried Lily inside while Clara stood in the doorway of the main house, overwhelmed by the simple fact of warmth. The front room held a stone fireplace tall enough to walk into, flames crackling behind an iron grate. Furniture built from rough-hewn timber filled the space. A table, chairs, a sofa covered in worn leather. Everything was clean but austere, functional without being comfortable. It was a house where someone lived but didn't quite inhabit, where life happened in the margins. "Kitchen's through there," Caleb said, nodding toward an archway. 2 bedrooms upstairs. The cabin out back has a stove and a bed. Thought you might want your own space. But tonight, with the girl so weak, you should stay in here. Easier to keep her warm." He laid Lily on the sofa with a gentleness that made Clara's chest ache. The child didn't wake, her breathing deep and even for the first time in days. "I'll bring in your things," Caleb said, already moving toward the door. "Mr. Rowan." He stopped, one hand on the frame. "Caleb, we're past formalities." "Caleb, then." Clara twisted her hands together. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the work." But his mouth quirked slightly, almost a smile. "There's stew on the stove from this morning. Help yourself. Bedroom on the right is yours for tonight. Hasn't been used in years, but the sheets are clean. I'll take the one on the left." He went out into the darkness, leaving Clara standing in a stranger's house with her sleeping daughter, and a feeling like vertigo, like she'd stepped off a cliff and hadn't yet hit the ground. She moved through the kitchen in a daze, found the pot of stew still warm on the cast-iron stove, ladled some into a bowl. The smell alone nearly brought her to tears. Beef and potatoes and carrots, thick with gravy, rich enough to sustain life. She ate standing up, too hungry to sit, too tired to taste much beyond salt and fat and blessed heat. When Caleb returned with her bag, she was washing the bowl in a basin of water heated on the stove. "You don't have to do that tonight," he said. "I'm here to work." "You're here to survive. Work starts tomorrow." He set the bag by the stairs. "I'll check the animals, bank the fires. You get some sleep." Clara nodded, too exhausted to argue. She climbed the stairs with legs that felt like lead, found the bedroom he'd mentioned, small, plain, dominated by a bed with a thick quilt. She went back down for Lily, carried her daughter up, tucked her in fully clothed because she couldn't manage anything more complicated. The child stirred, opened her eyes briefly. "Mama?" "I'm here, baby. Go back to sleep." "I like it here. It smells like wood and horses." Clara smoothed her daughter's hair. "Me too." Within moments, Lily was asleep again. Clara meant to undress, to wash, to do any of the things civilized people did before bed. Instead, she lay down beside her daughter, pulled the quilt over them both, and fell into darkness so complete it felt like drowning. She woke to morning light streaming through a window she didn't remember, in a bed she didn't recognize, to the sound of voices downstairs, one deep and male, one high and delighted. Lily. Clara sat up fast, her heart racing, and found the space beside her empty. She scrambled out of bed, still wearing yesterday's dress, and rushed downstairs. In the kitchen, she found her daughter sitting at the table eating scrambled eggs while Caleb stood at the stove frying bacon. Lily was talking animatedly, her hands gesturing, more alive than Clara had seen her in weeks. And then Mama sold her ring, but the man at the shop said it wasn't worth much because it didn't have a real diamond, even though Papa said it did. "Morning," Caleb said, glancing up as Clara appeared in the doorway. "Hope you don't mind." She was hungry. Clara's hands went to her hair, which had come loose from its pins and hung in tangles around her shoulders. "I'm sorry, I should have been up. You needed sleep." He slid bacon onto a plate, added eggs and toast, and set it in front of an empty chair. "Eat." Clara sat, too flustered to protest. The food was simple but perfect. Eggs cooked through, bacon crisp, toast with real butter. She ate while Lily chattered on about the chickens she'd seen through the window, and could she please go feed them? "After breakfast," Caleb said. "If your mama says it's all right." Both of them looked at Clara, waiting. She swallowed a bite of toast. "I suppose. But stay where I can see you." "I'll go with her," Caleb offered. "Show her how it's done." Lily bounced in her seat. "Can I collect the eggs?" "That's the whole point." Caleb poured coffee into a tin cup and slid it across the table to Clara. "Fair warning, there's a rooster who thinks he's in charge. Don't let him intimidate you." "I'm not afraid of roosters," Lily declared. "Good. Neither am I. We'll get along fine." Clara sipped the coffee, strong and bitter and exactly what she needed, and watched this man interact with her daughter as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He didn't talk down to Lily, didn't dismiss her excitement, didn't treat her like an interruption. He just listened, responded, made space for her in his morning routine. It was more than Thomas had ever done, and the thought made Clara feel guilty and grateful in equal measure. After breakfast, Caleb bundled Lily into a coat he pulled from a trunk, too large, clearly meant for a smaller child years ago, but warm. He caught Clara's expression and said quietly, "It was my daughter's. Seems a shame to let it go to waste." "Are you sure?" "She'd want someone to use it." He said it simply, a statement of fact rather than sentiment, and Clara understood that this was how he grieved, by making dead things useful again. They went out together, Caleb and Lily, leaving Clara alone in the warm kitchen. She stood at the window and watched them cross the yard to the chicken coop, watched her daughter's excitement as birds scattered at their approach, watched Caleb crouch down to show Lily how to scatter feed. The mountain morning was crystalline, everything sharp-edged and bright. Snow clung to the high peaks, but down here in the valley the ground was patchy, mud and dead grass and ice in the shadows. The barn stood solid and red against white sky. Horses moved in the pasture like dark poetry. Clara realized she was crying and didn't know when she'd started. She wiped her eyes roughly and turned from the window, surveying the kitchen with fresh attention. Dishes were stacked haphazardly in a cupboard. The floor needed sweeping. The stove required blacking. Curtains hung limp and dust-covered at the windows. This was work she understood, work she could do. She found an apron hanging on a peg, tied it around her waist, and began. By the time Caleb and Lily returned with a basket of eggs, Clara had swept the floors, washed the dishes properly, organized the cupboards, and started a pot of beans soaking for dinner. She was scrubbing the stove when they came in, stamping snow from their boots. "Mama, look!" Lily held up the basket proudly. 13 eggs! Caleb says that's good luck." "Does he?" Clara smiled at her daughter's flushed cheeks, her bright eyes. That's wonderful, baby. Caleb set a pail of milk on the counter. Cow's been patient with me, but she'd probably appreciate a woman's touch. You know how to milk? I grew up on a farm in Missouri. I know my way around livestock. Good. She's all yours then. He looked around the kitchen, taking in the changes. You didn't have to do all this today. I did, actually. You gave us food and shelter. The least I can do is make myself useful. Clara, this is the arrangement, isn't it? I work, you pay wages. I'd like to earn what I'm given. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or understanding. All right, fair enough. But pace yourself. Place isn't going anywhere. He showed her the rest of the ranch after that, Lily trailing behind them like a devoted shadow. The barn held 6 horses, Samson and Daisy plus 4 others, all good ranch stock built for mountain work. The cow, a placid Jersey named Bess, occupied a small paddock near the barn. Chickens scratched in their yard. A smokehouse stood empty, waiting for fall butchering. The cabin he'd mentioned sat 100 feet from the main house, small but solid, with a stone chimney and real glass windows. Previous hand lived here, Caleb explained, pushing open the door. Moved on last year. Haven't had reason to use it since. Inside was a single room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a potbelly stove. Simple, clean, private. It's perfect, Clara said. You sure? Winters get cold out here. We'll manage. Better than the tannery. Caleb nodded. I'll bring wood tonight. Get the stove going. You can move your things whenever you're ready. They walked back toward the main house, Lily running ahead to investigate a magpie that scolded from a fence post. The sun had climbed high enough to provide real warmth, and Clara turned her face toward it, feeling heat on her skin for the first time in weeks. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. Why did you help us? In town you could have walked past. Most people did. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, watching Lily chase the bird. 4 years ago, I stood in the ashes of my house and tried to understand how everything could disappear that fast. My wife, my daughter, every damn thing I'd built. Gone in an afternoon. Clara waited, sensing he needed to say this. People came by after, neighbors, friends. They brought food, offered condolences, asked what they could do. But none of them could give me back what I'd lost, so eventually they stopped coming, and I was alone. He kicked at a clump of frozen mud. I got used to it. Told myself I preferred it. But yesterday, when I saw that child in your arms barely breathing, and you standing there with nothing left but the will to keep her alive, he stopped, his jaw working. I couldn't walk past that. Wouldn't have been able to live with myself. So you saved us. So I gave you a choice. There's a difference. Clara considered this. What would you have done if I'd said no? Respected it. Made sure you had enough food to last a while, checked on you in a week. He met her eyes. But I'm glad you said yes. Me too. They stood there in the yard, the mountain wind moving through the pines, the sound of Lily's laughter carrying on cold air. Clara felt the strangeness of the moment. Less than 24 hours ago, she'd been starving and hopeless, and now she stood on a ranch in the high country with a man who'd shown her more kindness in a day than Silver Peak had shown in months. I should warn you, Caleb said. This place is isolated. We won't see another soul until I go to town for supplies in a few weeks. If you're used to company, to conversation, I'm used to being judged. Silence sounds like paradise. He almost smiled. Fair enough. But if you need something, if the girl needs something, you tell me. Understood? Understood. And Clara? He waited until she looked at him. Whatever happened in Silver Peak, whatever people said about you, it doesn't matter here. This is a fresh start. Make of it what you will. The words settled into her chest like warm stones. Thank you. He tipped his hat and went to check the fence lines, leaving Clara standing in the yard with her daughter's laughter in her ears and something like peace beginning to take root. The days developed a rhythm. Clara woke early, milked Bess, collected eggs, started breakfast. Caleb worked the land, mending fence, checking horses, splitting wood for fires that burned day and night. Lily followed him everywhere, asking 1,000 questions that he answered with patience Clara hadn't known men possessed. In the evenings, they ate together at the kitchen table. Simple meals Clara cooked from the ranch stores. Stew, cornbread, fried potatoes, bacon. They didn't talk much. Caleb wasn't a man who filled silence with chatter, and Clara had forgotten how to make conversation that wasn't defensive or desperate. But the quiet between them felt comfortable, like an old coat worn soft with use. After a week, Clara moved their things to the cabin. She scrubbed it top to bottom, hung curtains she'd sewn from flour sacks, arranged their few possessions to make it feel like home. Lily loved having her own space, loved the way the stove made the room warm, loved watching snow fall past the window before bed. Clara loved the privacy, the sense of having something that belonged to them alone. But most mornings she still went to the main house to cook breakfast, and most evenings they still ate together, and slowly the boundaries between her space and his began to blur in ways that felt natural rather than intrusive. 2 weeks after their arrival, Caleb came in from checking trap lines with a deer carcass slung over Samson's back. He butchered it in the barn, efficient and practiced, and brought the meat to the kitchen wrapped in clean cloth. "You know how to preserve venison?" he asked. "My mother taught me. Salt cure or smoke?" "Smoke. Smokehouse is behind the barn." They worked together through the afternoon, Clara cutting meat into strips while Caleb built a fire in the smokehouse, hung racks, adjusted ventilation. It was the kind of work that required coordination, that demanded they move in the same rhythm, anticipate each other's needs. Clara found herself aware of his presence in ways that made her uncomfortable. The strength in his hands as he lifted heavy racks, the concentration on his face as he judged the smoke, the way he moved through space like he owned it. She pushed the thoughts away. She was here to work, nothing more. Caleb had given her employment, not invitation. But that night, after Lily was asleep, Clara stood at the cabin window and looked across the dark yard at the main house, where lamplight glowed warm behind curtains. She thought about the way Caleb spoke to her daughter, gentle and serious, the way he'd carried extra wood to the cabin without being asked, the way he treated her like a person rather than a problem. She thought about her husband, who'd loved her in his way but had never quite seen her, who'd worked himself to death in mines he hated and left her with nothing but debt and grief. She thought about what it might mean to build something different, something better. Then she blew out her own lamp and went to bed, because thinking led to hoping, and hoping led to heartbreak, and she'd had enough of both to last a lifetime. The weather turned in mid-March, winter making one last vicious stand. Snow fell for 3 days straight, thick and heavy, until the world disappeared behind white curtains. Caleb brought Clara and Lily to the main house on the first day, saying the cabin stove wouldn't keep them warm enough in this. They were snowed in together, the three of them, no way in or out of the valley. Lily thought it was an adventure. She played with her doll by the fire, drew pictures on frost-covered windows, begged Caleb to tell her stories about the mountains. He obliged, his voice low and steady, tales about grizzly bears and mountain lions and winters so cold the trees exploded. Clara cooked, mended, organized, trying to stay useful. But by the second day, she'd run out of obvious tasks, and by the third, she found herself simply sitting by the fire with her hands idle, watching snow fall and feeling the strangest sense of contentment. "You're allowed to rest," Caleb said from across the room, where he was oiling leather tack. Clara startled. "I'm fine." "You've been working nonstop for 2 weeks. Take a breath." "I don't know how to just sit." "Then learn." He set aside the tack and crossed to the bookshelf, pulled down a worn volume. "You read?" "When I have time." "You have time now." He handed her the book, Poetry by Walt Whitman, the pages soft with handling. "My wife loved this one, used to read it out loud in the evenings." Clara took it carefully, aware she was holding something precious. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just enjoy it." She opened to a random page and began to read, the words washing over her like water. Beside her, Lily leaned against her shoulder, warm and solid. Across the room, Caleb worked leather with strong hands, the only sound the whisper of cloth on hide and wind against the walls. It felt like family. The thought terrified her. That night, after Lily was asleep upstairs, Clara came down to find Caleb still awake, sitting by the fire with a glass of whiskey. He looked up when she appeared. "Can't sleep?" "Thinking too much." He poured a second glass without asking and handed it to her. Clara took it, sat in the chair opposite his. The whiskey burned going down, but the warmth that followed felt good. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Clara stared into the fire. How strange this is. A month ago I was starving in Silver Peak, and now I'm drinking whiskey in a warm house while a blizzard tries to kill the world outside. It doesn't feel real. It's real. For how long? The question hung between them. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees, glass dangling from his fingers. As long as you want it to be. I meant what I said, Clara. This isn't temporary unless you make it temporary. People will talk when they find out. A widow and a widower living on the same ranch, no chaperone. Let them talk. It could ruin your reputation. He laughed, sharp and humorless. My reputation's already ruined. Has been since the fire. Half the town thinks I killed my family for the insurance money. The other half just thinks I'm cursed. Either way, I don't give a damn what they say. Clara took another sip of whiskey, gathering courage. What was she like? Your wife. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then, Sarah. Her name was Sarah. She was tough. Had to be, to survive up here. Good with horses, better with people. She could make friends with a fence post if she had a mind to. He smiled slightly, lost in memory. Our daughter, Emma, was just like her, stubborn, bright, laughing all the time. She was 5 when... He stopped, drained his glass. Clara waited. I was checking the north fence line, he finally said. Spring thaw had damaged some posts. I was gone maybe 4 hours. When I came back, the house was burning. Sarah had been cooking, and the grease caught fire. She got Emma outside, then went back for something, the lockbox with our papers, I think. The roof collapsed before she made it out. His voice remained steady, almost flat, but his hands gripped the glass so hard Clara thought it might shatter. Emma ran back in after her. Neighbors told me later they'd seen the smoke, come running. They tried to stop her, but she was so fast in the fire... He stopped again, swallowed hard. They found them together in the hall. Sarah was trying to protect her. Oh, Caleb. I buried them on the hill behind the barn. Built this house 6 months later, exactly where the old one stood. People thought I was crazy, but I couldn't leave. This is where they lived, where they died, where they stay. Clara set down her glass and moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. I'm so sorry. No one should have to carry that. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the depth of his grief, 4 years deep, maybe deeper, a wound that had scarred over but never healed. Some days I still hear her laughing, he said quietly. Emma, I mean. When the wind's right, when Lily laughs a certain way, for just a second, I forget. And then I remember, and it's like losing her all over again. Is that why you helped us? Because Lily reminds you of Emma? Maybe at first, but not now. His hands tightened on hers. Now I help you because you're here, because you matter, because watching Lily come back to life these past weeks has been... He struggled for words. It's been the first good thing in 4 years. Clara felt tears on her cheeks and didn't wipe them away. You gave us back our lives. You gave me back purpose. He reached up, brushed a tear from her face with his thumb. So I guess we're even. They sat there in the firelight, hands clasped, the storm raging outside while warmth held inside. Clara felt the moment expanding, felt possibility opening like a door she'd thought locked forever. Then Lily called from upstairs, Mama? And the spell broke. Clara stood quickly, suddenly aware of how close they'd been. I should... Go. She needs you. Clara climbed the stairs on shaking legs, her heart hammering. Lily had just been dreaming, nothing serious. Clara settled her daughter back to sleep, then stood at the window, watching snow fall in the darkness. Downstairs, she heard Caleb banking the fire, the house settling around him. She thought about his hands on hers. She thought about the way he'd looked at her, like she was something more than a burden or a body. She thought about what it might mean to stay, not just for safety or wages, but for something deeper. And standing there in the dark with her sleeping daughter behind her and a good man downstairs and a future that suddenly seemed possible, Clara made a decision. She would stay. She would work. She would build a life here. And maybe, just maybe, she would let herself hope for more than survival. Outside, the storm began to ease, and the first stars appeared through breaking clouds, cold and distant and beautiful. The storm broke before dawn, leaving the world transformed. Clara woke to silence so complete it felt holy, then heard Lily's delighted gasp from the window. "Mama, look, everything's magic!" Clara joined her daughter and understood immediately. Overnight, the ranch had become a kingdom of ice and light. Every branch glazed crystal, every surface diamond bright, the sun just cresting the peaks and turning it all to fire. Downstairs, Caleb already had coffee brewing and bacon sizzling. He glanced up when they appeared, his eyes finding Clara's for just a moment longer than necessary before he looked away. "Road'll be impassable for at least a week," he said, pouring coffee. "Maybe 2. We've got supplies to last a month if we're careful." "We'll be fine," Clara said, accepting the cup he offered. Their fingers brushed, and she felt the contact like electricity. The days that followed developed a new intimacy born of proximity and shared purpose. They were no longer just employer and employee, no longer strangers navigating careful boundaries. They were 3 people learning to move through space together, to anticipate needs and fill silences and exist in the same rooms without awkwardness. Caleb taught Lily to play checkers by the fire, letting her win just often enough to keep her interested. Clara baked bread and mended his shirts, her needle moving through fabric while he read aloud from books she'd never had time for before. Adventure stories that made Lily's eyes go wide, histories of mountain men and frontier women, poetry that made Clara's chest ache with its beauty. In the evenings, after Lily slept, they sat together and talked. Not about anything profound, just the small details of lives lived separately until now. Caleb told her about building the ranch from nothing, about learning to survive winters that could kill, about the satisfaction of work that left his body tired and his mind clear. Clara told him about Missouri, about the farm she'd grown up on, about meeting Thomas at a church social and thinking he'd give her a life of adventure. "Did he?" Caleb asked. Clara laughed softly. "He gave me mining camps and company towns and a cough that never went away. Adventure, I suppose, if you define it as constant uncertainty." "You loved him?" She considered the question honestly. "I loved who I thought he was, the man who promised me the world. It took me years to realize he'd promised the world because he had no idea how to build a home." Caleb nodded slowly. "Sarah used to say I loved this land more than I loved her. Maybe she was right. I brought her up here knowing how hard it would be, knowing she'd be isolated, and I told myself it would be enough because it was enough for me." He stared into his whiskey. "Turns out love isn't about what's enough for you. It's about what the other person needs." "Do you think she was happy?" "Some days. Others, I'd catch her staring at the mountains like they were prison walls." He was quiet for a moment. "The day she died, we'd argued that morning. She wanted to go to Denver for Emma's birthday, wanted the girl to see a real city, have a party with other children. I said we couldn't afford it, couldn't spare the time. So she was angry with me, and I was stubborn, and then I left to fix fence posts that could have waited another damn day." Clara reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. "You can't carry that forever. Watch me." But his hand stayed in hers, and they sat like that until the fire burned low, connected by touch and shared grief and something neither of them had words for yet. The weather warmed gradually, spring creeping into the high country with cautious optimism. Snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and mud, and the first brave shoots of green. Caleb began preparing for planting season, and Clara helped him sort seed and repair tools and plan the garden that would feed them through the next winter. They worked side by side in the barn one afternoon, Lily napping in the house, the air smelling of hay and leather and approaching rain. Caleb was mending harness while Clara organized seed packets, and the silence between them felt comfortable until he spoke. "There's something I need to tell you." Clara's hand stilled. "All right. I have to go to Silver Peak next week. Supplies we can't make or grow ourselves, nails, sugar, coffee, ammunition, things that won't keep another month." "I understand. I'll be gone 2 days, maybe 3, depending on the road." He set aside the harness and looked at her directly. "I need to know if you'll be all right here alone. If something happened, nothing will happen. I can handle a rifle if I need to, and I'm not afraid of solitude." "It's not the solitude I'm worried about." He hesitated, choosing words carefully. "When people in town realize I've got a woman and child living on my ranch, there'll be talk. And when talk starts, sometimes it brings visitors. The kind who think they have a right to check on your welfare, make sure you're not being held against your will or corrupted or whatever nonsense they decide to believe. Clara felt her spine straighten. Let them come. I'll tell them the truth, that you saved our lives and treated us with nothing but respect and decency. The truth won't matter to people who've already decided what to think. Then their opinions don't matter to me. She met his eyes. I'm not ashamed of being here, Caleb. I'm grateful. If they can't understand the difference between gratitude and impropriety, that's their failing, not ours. Something shifted in his expression, pride maybe, or relief. You're stronger than Sarah ever was. Sarah survived up here for years. That takes strength I'm still learning. Different kinds of strength, then. He picked up the harness again, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. I'll leave you the shotgun, loaded, above the door, and if anyone gives you trouble, anyone at all, you send them packing and don't worry about politeness. I can be remarkably impolite when necessary. He almost smiled. I'm starting to see that. Caleb left on a Tuesday morning, the road finally clear enough for Samson to manage with packs loaded. Clara stood in the yard with Lily and watched him ride out, feeling an unexpected hollowness in her chest as he disappeared around the bend. I'll miss him, Lily said. Me too, baby. Do you think he'll come back? Clara looked down at her daughter, surprised. Of course he will. This is his home. Papa didn't come back. The words hit Clara like a fist. She knelt in the mud and pulled Lily close. Papa didn't have a choice, sweetheart. He was sick, and sometimes being sick means you can't stay no matter how much you want to. But Caleb isn't sick. He's strong and careful, and he promised he'd be back in 3 days. You're sure? I'm sure. But watching the empty road, Clara felt the weight of promises made by men and broken by circumstance, and she understood her daughter's fear in a way that made her own chest tight. They filled the days with work. Clara planted early greens in the kitchen garden, tended the animals, baked bread, scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing just to keep her hands busy. Lily helped with everything, chattering constantly to fill the silence Caleb's absence had created. On the second evening, Clara was preparing dinner when she heard horses approaching. Her hand stilled on the knife she'd been using to chop carrots. The shotgun hung above the door exactly where Caleb had left it, loaded and ready. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. 3 riders were coming up the road, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in town clothes that looked ridiculous against the mountain backdrop. Clara recognized the woman immediately, Mrs. Lansing, who ran the Church Ladies' Auxiliary in Silver Peak and had once told Clara to her face that decent women didn't end up widowed and destitute. Lily, Clara said quietly, go upstairs to your room and stay there until I call you. Understand? Her daughter's eyes went wide, but she nodded and obeyed without argument. Clara took down the shotgun, checked that it was loaded, and propped it casually against the doorframe where it would be visible but not overtly threatening. Then she stepped out onto the porch and waited. The riders stopped in the yard. Mrs. Lansing dismounted first, her face set in lines of righteous determination. The 2 men with her, Clara didn't recognize them, but their vests identified them as some kind of officials, followed more slowly. Mrs. Hayes, Mrs. Lansing said, her voice dripping false concern. What a relief to find you well. We've been so worried. Have you? Clara kept her voice flat, uninviting. When Mr. Rowan came to town yesterday asking after supplies and mentioned he had guests at his ranch, naturally we were concerned. A woman of your situation, living alone with an unmarried man, so far from civilized supervision, it raised questions. What kind of questions? One of the men stepped forward, older, gray-haired, with a badge pinned to his chest. I'm Deputy Marshal Hewitt, ma'am. This is Mr. Connors from the Territorial Welfare Office. We're here to ensure your well-being and that of your daughter. Clara's hands curled into fists. My well-being is fine, thank you, and my daughter is healthy, fed, and safe, none of which was true when we lived in Silver Peak. Nevertheless, Mrs. Lansing interjected, propriety must be observed. A woman living unchaperoned with a man to whom she's not married. I'm his employee. I cook and clean in exchange for wages and housing. There's nothing improper about that arrangement. Where do you sleep? Mr. Connors asked bluntly. Clara felt her face flush with anger. In the cabin, separate from the main house. Mr. Rowan sleeps in his own home, and I sleep in mine with my daughter. Our living arrangements are perfectly respectable." "And yet," Mrs. Lansing said, her voice going sharp, "here you are alone in his house, wearing his wife's apron. Yes, I recognize it. Acting as mistress of this household. Can you truly expect us to believe nothing untoward has occurred?" "I don't expect you to believe anything. I don't care what you believe. What I know is that Caleb Rowan showed my daughter and me more Christian charity in one afternoon than your entire congregation managed in a month. So if you've come here to judge me, you can turn around and ride back to town." The deputy cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hayes, we're not here to judge. But we do have a responsibility to investigate situations that might involve moral corruption or endangerment of children. My daughter isn't endangered. She's thriving. For the first time in months, she has enough to eat, a warm place to sleep, and an adult who treats her with kindness and respect." "Even so," Mr. Connors said, pulling out a notebook, "I'll need to interview the child, alone, to ensure she hasn't been coached." Something cold and hard settled in Clara's chest. "No. Ma'am, I'm afraid it's not optional." "You're right, it's not." Clara reached back and wrapped her hand around the shotgun, not pointing it, not threatening, just making its presence clear. "You're not interviewing my daughter. You're not coming into this house, and you're not questioning my choices or my morals or my fitness as a mother." Mrs. Lansing gasped. "Are you threatening us with violence?" "I'm protecting my child from strangers who show up uninvited making accusations. If that requires violence, so be it." Deputy Hewitt held up both hands in a calming gesture. "Now let's all take a breath here. Mrs. Hayes, I understand you're defensive, but we really do just want to help. The way Silver Peak helped us when we were starving, the way the church helped when we had nowhere to go, that kind of help I can do without." The three visitors exchanged glances. Then Mr. Connors said, "There's another matter we need to discuss. According to our records, your daughter has a living relative, her uncle, Jacob Hayes. He's expressed interest in assuming guardianship, given the instability of your current situation." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Jacob told you he wanted custody? He came to our office last week, said he was concerned about the child being raised in immoral circumstances, that perhaps she'd be better off with family who could provide proper supervision and values. Jacob threw us out after my husband's funeral. He called Lily a mistake to her face. He doesn't want her. He wants to punish me. Nevertheless, he is blood family, and given your current living arrangements, a judge might look favorably on his petition. Over my dead body. Mrs. Hayes, no." Clara's voice rang out across the yard, hard as iron. "You want to take my daughter, you'll have to go through me. And I promise you that won't be easy." Silence fell, broken only by the wind in the pines and the restless shifting of horses. The three visitors looked at each other, clearly unsure how to proceed in the face of a desperate mother's defiance. Finally, Deputy Hewitt spoke, his voice more gentle than before. "Ma'am, nobody wants to take your daughter. But you have to understand how this looks. A widow living with a single man, isolated from society, refusing to allow welfare checks. It raises red flags." "Then let me paint you a clearer picture," Clara said, her voice shaking but steady. 2 months ago, my daughter was dying of starvation in Silver Peak, while your churches and businesses and good Christian citizens watched and did nothing. Caleb Rowan was the only person who saw a child in need and helped without asking for anything in return. He gave us food, shelter, and honest work. He's been nothing but respectful and decent. If you can't see the difference between that and something shameful, then you're not here to help. You're here to judge. And I'm done being judged by people who wouldn't lift a finger when we needed it." Mrs. Lansing drew herself up, affronted. "I'll have you know the church auxiliary told me decent women don't end up destitute. Those were your exact words, Mrs. Lansing, when I came begging for help, so forgive me if I don't care about your opinion on decency." The older woman's face went red, but before she could respond, Mr. Connors cut in. "This isn't getting us anywhere. Mrs. Hayes, we'll be filing a report on this visit. If you want to keep custody of your daughter, I strongly suggest you consider returning to town where proper supervision can be maintained." Supervision by whom? People who watched her starve. Supervision by a community that can ensure her moral and physical welfare. She has that here. You can't possibly believe a man like Caleb Rowan is a better man than most I've met in town. Yes, actually, I do believe that. Deputy Hewitt sighed heavily. Mrs. Hayes, I'm going to give you some advice, woman to woman. Well, man to woman, but still. You're putting yourself in a position where people will make assumptions. Fair or not, those assumptions have consequences. If you care about your daughter's future, you might want to think about protecting her reputation as well as her stomach. Clara laughed, the sound bitter and tired. Her reputation? She's 4 years old. The only thing she needs is food and safety and love. Everything else is just noise from people who never had to make impossible choices. The three visitors mounted their horses, clearly recognizing a stalemate when they saw one. Mrs. Lansing looked down at Clara with something like pity mixed with disdain. You're making a terrible mistake, she said. And when it ends badly, and it will, don't expect sympathy from those of us who tried to warn you. I won't, Clara promised. I don't expect anything from Silver Peak except exactly what it's already given me. Nothing. They rode away, and Clara stood on the porch with the shotgun in her hands, shaking so hard she had to sit down before her legs gave out. Lily appeared in the doorway moments later, her face pale. Are they going to take me away? Clara pulled her daughter onto her lap and held her tight. No, baby, no one's taking you anywhere, I promise. But they said, I don't care what they said. You're mine, and I'm yours, and nobody changes that, nobody. Lily buried her face in Clara's neck, and Clara felt her daughter's tears hot against her skin. She rocked the child gently, staring out at the mountains that surrounded them like walls, wondering what the hell she was going to do when Caleb came back and learned that she'd just made him complicit in a scandal, wondering if he'd still want them here when he understood the cost. Caleb returned the next afternoon with packs full of supplies and a tension in his shoulders that told Clara he'd already heard. He dismounted slowly, his eyes finding hers across the yard. They came here, he said. It wasn't a question. Yesterday evening, Mrs. Lansing, a deputy marshal, and some welfare officer, they wanted to interview Lily, make sure I wasn't being corrupted or held against my will. Jesus! He tied Samson to the rail and started unloading packs with sharp, angry movements. I knew they'd talk, but I didn't think they'd... He stopped, his jaw working. What did you tell them? The truth. That you gave us work and shelter and treated us with respect. That we're grateful and safe and none of their damn business. And? Clara hesitated. They mentioned Jacob, Thomas's brother. Apparently he's trying to get custody of Lily. Caleb went very still. On what grounds? Impropriety. Immoral living conditions. Take your pick. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. They said a judge might look favorably on his petition given our situation. Your situation is that you're a widow who works for wages. There's nothing immoral about that. Except we both know how it looks. A woman and a man, unmarried, living on the same property miles from anywhere. Add in the fact that I refuse to let them interview Lily, and they've got all the ammunition they need to paint me as unfit. Caleb set down the pack he'd been holding and crossed to where she stood. Clara, look at me. She did, seeing anger in his face, but also something fiercer, determination. They're not taking that child, he said. I don't give a damn what judge they find or what accusations they make. Lily stays here, with you, where she's safe and loved and fed. You understand? It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. His hands came up to grip her shoulders, solid and warm. You think I'm going to let some bureaucrat and a hypocrite churchwoman tear apart the first good thing that's happened on this ranch in 4 years? You think I'm going to stand by while they punish you for having the courage to survive? Caleb, no, listen to me. Whatever happens, whatever they say or do or threaten, you're not alone in this. I'm with you. We'll fight this together. Clara felt tears burning in her eyes. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. They came to my property, threatened my employee, tried to take a child. He stopped abruptly, seeming to catch himself. A child who belongs here. That makes it my fight. They stood there in the yard, his hands on her shoulders, her eyes locked on his, and Clara felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This was more than employer and employee, more than two people sharing space out of necessity. This was something that could destroy them both if they weren't careful, or save them, if they were brave enough. What do we do? She whispered. Caleb's hands tightened on her shoulders, then released. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. We make it impossible for them to argue impropriety. We document everything, your wages, your living arrangements, Lily's health. We get character witnesses if we can find anyone in this godforsaken territory willing to stand up to gossip. And if they still come after you, then what? He met her eyes, and she saw the answer there before he spoke it. Then we make it legal. We make it so they can't question your living situation because there's nothing to question. Clara's breath caught. You're talking about marriage. I'm talking about protection, for you and Lily both. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was proposing a business arrangement rather than a lifetime commitment. It's not ideal, I know, but it would solve the problem. No one could question your morals if you were my wife. Jacob would have no grounds for custody. The welfare office would have to back off. Caleb, you can't just... People don't get married to avoid scandal. People get married for a lot worse reasons. At least this way, everyone gets what they need. You get safety and security. Lily gets a stable home. I get... He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. I get to keep you both here, which, turns out, matters more than I expected. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This is insane. Maybe, but is it more insane than what we're already doing? Than pretending this arrangement doesn't look exactly like what they're accusing us of? We haven't done anything wrong. No, but we could make it right in a way that silences every critic and protects everyone involved. Think about it, Clara. Really think about it. What's the alternative? You go back to town, find some room above another shop, try to find work while fighting Jacob for custody. You know how that ends. And this? How does this end? Honestly, I don't know, but at least we face it together instead of you facing it alone. Clara turned away, her mind spinning. Marriage to a man she'd known less than 2 months, a man who'd shown her more kindness than her own husband ever had, who made her daughter laugh, who looked at her like she mattered. A man who was offering protection wrapped in legal commitment, asking nothing for himself except the right to help. It was practical, logical, the smart choice. It was also terrifying. I need time to think, she said finally. Take all the time you need. But Clara? She looked back at him. Whatever you decide, I meant what I said. You're not fighting this alone. With or without a marriage certificate, I'm not letting them take Lily. That's a promise. He gathered the supplies and carried them inside, leaving Clara standing in the yard as the sun sank toward the mountains, painting everything gold and red and impossible. Inside the house, she could hear Lily's delighted greeting, Caleb's low response, the sound of normalcy and safety, and something that felt dangerously close to home. And standing there between the mountains and the coming dark, Clara understood that the choice wasn't really about marriage or propriety or legal protection. It was about whether she was brave enough to reach for something more than survival, whether she could trust that what looked like rescue might actually be partnership, whether she dared to hope that a man who'd lost everything might be willing to build something new with a woman who had nothing left to lose. The answer, she realized, had been growing in her heart for weeks. She just had to find the courage to speak it out loud. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay in the cabin bed with Lily curled beside her, listening to the wind move through the pines and trying to untangle the knot of fear and hope in her chest. Marriage. The word kept circling her mind like a hawk over prey, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. She'd been married before. She knew what it meant. The loss of autonomy, the surrender of self, the slow erosion of dreams into duty. Thomas had loved her in his way, but his way had meant she existed to support his ambitions, bear his child, endure his choices without complaint. She'd been 20 when she married him, full of romantic notions about partnership and adventure. She'd learned quickly that marriage for women was less about partnership and more about service. But Caleb wasn't Thomas. The thought came unbidden, insistent. Caleb, who'd asked permission before giving candy to a dying child. Caleb, who'd offered employment instead of charity, wages instead of rescue. Caleb, who listened when she spoke and made space for her opinions and treated her daughter like she mattered. Caleb, who was proposing marriage not to possess her but to protect her. The difference felt significant, maybe even significant enough to risk everything on. Morning came gray and cold, threatening rain. Clara dressed Lily and walked to the main house through air that tasted like metal and ozone. Caleb was already in the kitchen, coffee made, eggs frying, his movements methodical and familiar. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the question in his eyes, even though he didn't voice it. "I need to ask you something first," Clara said, settling Lily at the table with a biscuit. "All right. If we did this, if we got married, what would you expect from me?" Caleb poured coffee, handed her a cup, took his time answering. "Same thing I expect now. Cooking, cleaning, help with the ranch work, honest conversation. Your company at dinner. And at night?" His hands stilled on the coffee pot. Then he set it down carefully and met her eyes. "That would be your choice. Always. I'm not asking for a wife in the biblical sense, Clara. I'm asking for a partner who happens to share my name. So this would be a marriage in name only. If that's what you want, yes." Clara studied his face, looking for deception or hidden agenda. She found only steady honesty, maybe tinged with something wistful he was trying to hide. "And if what I want changes," something flickered in his expression, hope, desire, fear, all mixed together, "then we deal with that when it happens, like reasonable adults who respect each other enough to be honest about what they need." "You'd really do that? Marry a woman and not expect—" "I lived alone for 4 years after Sarah died. I know how to manage my expectations." He picked up a spatula, turned the eggs with more force than necessary. "This isn't about what I expect from you, Clara. It's about what I can give you: legal protection, social legitimacy, a name that shields Lily from people like Jacob Hayes. If that comes with companionship and shared purpose, I count myself lucky. Anything beyond that is a gift I've got no right to demand." Clara felt something crack open in her chest. This man, this rough-hewn rancher who'd lost everything and rebuilt himself in the wilderness, was offering her a marriage based on respect instead of obligation. It seemed too good to be true, which meant it probably was. "What do you get out of this?" she asked bluntly. "Really, don't give me platitudes about companionship. What's in it for you?" Caleb turned from the stove, his gray eyes fierce. "You want the truth? I get to stop feeling like a ghost in my own life. I get to hear Lily's laughter and your voice reading poetry by the fire and know that this house is alive again instead of just a monument to the dead. I get purpose beyond surviving another winter. I get—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I get a reason to care about the future instead of just enduring the present." The raw honesty of it hit Clara like a physical blow. She set down her coffee cup because her hands were shaking. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "So am I. What if it doesn't work? What if we make each other miserable?" "Then we'll be miserable honestly instead of separately." He crossed to where she stood, stopped just close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Clara, I can't promise this will be easy or perfect, or anything like what marriage is supposed to be. But I can promise I'll respect you, listen to you, and never ask you to be less than what you are. That's more than most marriages start with." Clara looked at Lily, happily eating her biscuit and humming to herself, oblivious to the adult negotiations happening over her head. This child deserved stability, safety, a future that didn't involve being torn between a mother fighting to survive and an uncle motivated by spite. She looked back at Caleb, at this man who'd shown them both what protection without possession looked like, what strength without cruelty meant. She thought about the alternative, going back to Silver Peak, fighting Jacob in court with no money and no allies, watching her daughter's light dim again as hunger and fear returned. The choice, when she really looked at it, wasn't hard at all. "All right," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Caleb's eyes widened slightly, like he'd expected a different answer. "You're sure?" "No, but I'm sure I trust you more than I trust the courts or the town or my brother-in-law. So if you're offering partnership instead of ownership, I'm saying yes." He nodded slowly, something like relief washing over his face. "Then we'll do it right. Proper ceremony, witnesses, everything legal and documented so no one can question it later. There's a circuit preacher who comes through Silver Peak every 6 weeks. He was there when I was in town. Should be back in about a month." "A month?" Claire's stomach flipped. "That's not much time." "It's enough. We'll go to town together, get married in front of anyone who wants to watch, make it so public and official that every gossip and busybody has to accept it as legitimate. And until then, we keep doing exactly what we've been doing. You work, I pay wages, Lily thrives, and anyone who has a problem with it can go to hell. Lily looked up at that, her eyes wide. That's a bad word. Caleb had the grace to look sheepish. You're right. My apologies, little miss. I should have said they can go jump in the creek. That's better. Lily returned to her biscuit, satisfied. Clara met Caleb's eyes over her daughter's head and saw humor there, warmth, and something deeper that made her pulse quicken. This was really happening. In a month, she'd be Mrs. Caleb Rowan, bound legally to a man she barely knew, but trusted more than anyone she'd known her whole life. The insanity of it should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first sane decision she'd made in years. The next weeks passed in a strange suspension between ordinary life and approaching transformation. Clara continued her work with new energy, taking pride in every meal cooked and floor scrubbed and shirt mended. Caleb rode fence lines and broke horses and prepared fields for spring planting. But now there was a new gentleness in how he spoke to her, a careful attention in how he moved around her space. They didn't talk about the wedding much. There wasn't much to discuss. It would be simple, practical, legal. But sometimes Clara caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. And sometimes she found herself wondering what it would be like to be married to a man who actually saw her instead of just using her as a mirror for his own ambitions. Lily told only that Caleb and her mother were getting married, and that meant they'd all live together as a real family, accepted the news with the easy adaptability of children. She asked if she could call Caleb Papa, and seemed satisfied when Clara said she should ask him herself. Can I? Lily asked him that evening, sitting on his lap by the fire while Clara mended nearby. Caleb's hands, rough and capable, stilled in her hair where he'd been trying to braid it. Can you what, little one? Call you Papa. Since you're marrying Mama, and we'll be a family. Clara watched his face carefully, saw emotion flicker across it, grief for the daughter he'd lost, tenderness for the child asking to claim him, something like fear at the responsibility inherent in that title. I'd be honored, he said quietly, but only if you're sure. Your real Papa, my real Papa is dead, Lily said with the brutal honesty of 4-year-olds. And he never played checkers with me or taught me about chickens or carried me when I was too tired to walk. You do those things. So I think you should be my Papa now. Caleb pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, and Clara saw his shoulders shake slightly. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. Then I'm your Papa, he said, his voice rough. And you're my daughter. Anyone who says different will answer to me. Lily hugged him fiercely, and Clara had to look away before her own tears spilled over. This family they were building from broken pieces. It wasn't what anyone would have chosen, but it was theirs. And it was real. And watching it take shape made Clara believe in second chances. 3 weeks after Caleb's proposal, a rider came up the valley road just after dawn. Clara was collecting eggs when she heard the horse, and her first thought was that the town busybodies had returned. She grabbed the shotgun from its place by the door and stepped onto the porch, only to see Caleb already walking to meet the visitor with his rifle cradled casually in his arms. The rider was young, maybe 20, wearing a deputy's badge that looked too big for his narrow chest. He pulled up his horse well short of threatening distance and called out, "Mr. Rowan, I've got papers for you, sir. Official business from the territorial court." Clara's blood went cold. She set down the egg basket and crossed the yard, arriving just as Caleb took the envelope the deputy offered. "What kind of papers?" Caleb asked, his voice level but edged with warning. "Custody petition, sir. A Mr. Jacob Hayes is suing for guardianship of one Lily Hayes, daughter of the late Thomas Hayes. Mrs. Clara Hayes is named as respondent. Court date set for 3 weeks from today in Silver Peak." Caleb tore open the envelope and scanned the contents, his jaw tightening with each line. "This says the child is living in conditions of moral corruption and that the mother is unfit due to improper cohabitation with an unrelated male." "That's what it says, sir. I'm just delivering it." "Who signed off on this?" Clara demanded, her voice shaking with rage. The deputy consulted his notes. "Judge Morrison. He's the territorial family court judge, makes the circuit every few months. He'll be in Silver Peak to hear the case." "And we're expected to just show up and let some judge who doesn't know us from Adam decide whether my daughter stays with me?" "Yes, ma'am. That's how the law works. If you don't appear, the court can rule against you by default." The deputy shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I don't think Mr. Hayes has much of a case, but you'll need to make your argument to the judge. Caleb folded the papers carefully, his movements controlled, but Clara could see the fury in the set of his shoulders. You tell Judge Morrison that Mrs. Hayes will be there. And tell Jacob Hayes that if he wants this fight, he's going to get more than he bargained for. The deputy tipped his hat and rode off, leaving Clara and Caleb standing in the yard with the legal summons between them like a declaration of war. They're really doing this, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. They're really trying to take her. Not if I have anything to say about it. Caleb turned to her, his eyes blazing. When's the preacher due back in town? You said 6 weeks from when you saw him. That's still 2 weeks away. Then we move up the timeline. There's got to be someone authorized to perform marriages closer than Silver Peak. A justice of the peace, another preacher, someone. Even if we found someone today, we'd barely be married a week before the hearing. Will that be enough? Caleb's smile was sharp and dangerous. It'll have to be, because I'll be damned if I let Jacob Hayes or any judge take that child based on moral corruption charges when her mother is legally married to a respectable rancher. We just need to make it official before that court date. They spent the next 2 days in a flurry of preparation. Caleb rode to the nearest settlement, a mining camp called Prospect Creek, 40 miles east, and returned with news that, yes, there was a justice of the peace there who could perform a legal marriage. They set the date for 5 days hence, giving Clara just enough time to alter her best dress and prepare herself mentally for what was coming. The night before they were to leave for Prospect Creek, Clara sat on the porch of the cabin watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Lily was asleep inside, exhausted from the excitement of upcoming travel. Clara felt hollowed out, scraped clean by worry and determination in equal measure. Footsteps on gravel announced Caleb's approach. He climbed the porch steps and settled into the chair beside hers, offering her a cup of coffee that she accepted gratefully. You all right? He asked. I'm terrified. Of the marriage or the court case? Both, neither, everything. She sipped the coffee, letting the bitter heat ground her. I keep thinking about what happens if the judge doesn't accept our marriage as legitimate. What if he sees through it, knows it's just for show? It's not just for show. Clara looked at him sharply. Isn't it? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkness. When I asked you to marry me, yeah, the legal protection was the reason I gave, but Clara... He turned to face her, and even in the dim light she could see the intensity in his eyes. These past weeks, watching you turn this place back into a home, watching Lily bloom, having someone to talk to who actually listens, it's not just convenient, it's not just practical. It's the first time in 4 years I've wanted to wake up in the morning instead of just surviving until nightfall. Clara's breath caught. Caleb, I'm not asking you to love me. I know that's not part of our agreement, but I need you to know that when I stand up in front of that justice of the peace tomorrow and promise to be your husband, I won't be lying. I'll mean every word, even if the reasons aren't conventional. What are you saying? He reached over and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. I'm saying this marriage might be starting as a legal strategy, but for me it's already become something more. And I wanted you to know that before we do this, so you're going in with all the facts. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. You care about me. Yes. And Lily. Like she's my own, even though we're practically strangers. Strangers don't share the things we've shared. Grief, hope, fear, breakfast. His mouth quirked slightly. We're not strangers, Clara. We might not know all the details of each other's lives yet, but we know what matters. We know each other's hearts. Clara looked down at their joined hands, at the way his dwarfed hers, strong enough to break but gentle enough to heal. She thought about Thomas, who'd known her for 2 years before proposing, and still never really understood what she needed. She thought about this man who'd known her barely 2 months, and somehow saw her more clearly than anyone ever had. I'm afraid of disappointing you, she whispered, of not being what you need. You're already exactly what I need. Everything else is just details we'll figure out as we go. She turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. I can't promise I'll ever love you the way Sarah did. I'm not asking you to love me like Sarah. I'm asking you to love me like Clara if you ever do. And if you don't, I'll still count myself lucky for the partnership. Clara met his eyes and made a decision. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, brief and chaste but intentional. When she pulled back, his eyes had gone dark. "I can't promise love," she said, "but I can promise I'll try. That I'll be honest with you about what I'm feeling, even when it's messy. That I'll be a real wife, not just a legal arrangement. Is that enough?" Caleb's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "That's more than enough. That's everything." He kissed her then, deeper than her tentative offering, and Clara felt heat bloom through her body, desire awakening after years of dormancy. His mouth was firm and sure, tasting of coffee and promise, and when he finally pulled away, they were both breathing hard. "We should probably save the rest for after the wedding," he said, voice rough. "Probably." But Clara didn't let go of his hand. They sat there on the porch for another hour, talking quietly about the logistics of the next few days, about the court case and what arguments to make, about mundane things like whether they had enough flour and did the horses need new shoes. But underneath the practical conversation ran a current of something new and fragile and deeply promising. When Clara finally went inside to sleep, she lay awake thinking about the kiss, about the way Caleb's hand had felt in hers, about the fact that in less than 24 hours she'd be married again, but this time to a man who saw her as a partner instead of a possession. The fear was still there, sharp and insistent, but now it was balanced by hope, and that made all the difference. They left for Prospect Creek at dawn, Caleb on Samson, Clara and Lily sharing Daisy. The ride took most of the day, the trail rough and the weather uncertain. Lily dozed against Clara's chest, lulled by the horse's steady rhythm, while Clara watched the landscape change from high country pines to lower elevation scrub. Prospect Creek turned out to be a collection of rough buildings clustered around a played-out silver mine, more desperate than prosperous. But it had a general store, a saloon, and a small office where the justice of the peace conducted business 3 days a week. They arrived just as the sun touched the western peaks. Caleb helped Clara down from Daisy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and Clara saw her own nervousness reflected back. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but let's do it anyway." The justice of the peace was a gray-haired man named Hutchins, who looked like he'd seen everything and been surprised by none of it. He glanced at Clara's worn dress and Lily's sleepy face, at Caleb's mountain man bulk and determined expression, and nodded like this all made perfect sense. "You got witnesses?" he asked. "Just us," Caleb said. "I can grab a couple folks from the saloon. They're usually willing for $1. Hutchins went to the door and hollered, and 2 minutes later a bearded miner and a woman in a faded calico dress appeared, looking curious and slightly drunk. "These good people are getting married," Hutchins announced. "You're here to witness. Stand there, look official, don't interrupt." The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. Hutchins read from a battered book, asked the required questions, accepted their affirmative answers. When he got to the part about rings, Caleb produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, he said, kept in a drawer for years waiting for purpose. He slid it onto Clara's finger, and she felt the weight of it. Commitment, protection, promise. "You may kiss your bride," Hutchins said, already filling out the marriage certificate. Caleb looked at Clara, silently asking permission. She nodded, and he kissed her softly, mindful of their audience, but his hand came up to cradle her face and his thumb stroked her cheek, and Clara felt something shift and settle in her chest. When they pulled apart, Lily was clapping and the witnesses were grinning, and Hutchins was handing over the certificate with a bored flourish. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Rowan. That'll be $5. Caleb paid, took the certificate, and tucked it carefully into his coat pocket. They thanked the witnesses, who wandered back to the saloon already telling the story to anyone who'd listen. Clara stood in the dusty street holding her daughter's hand and wearing a dead woman's ring, legally married to a man she'd met 2 months ago. She should have felt trapped, panic rising at the permanence of what she'd just done. Instead, she felt safe. They stayed the night in Prospect Creek's only boarding house, Caleb paying for 2 rooms, though Clara suspected they could have shared one without scandal now. But he was being careful, respectful, giving her space to adjust to this new reality. Clara put Lily to bed and sat by the window of her room, turning the ring on her finger, trying to understand how her life had changed so completely so fast. 6 weeks ago, she'd been starving. Now she was married, protected, fighting for her daughter's future with a partner instead of alone. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Caleb standing in the hall, still dressed, his hair damp like he'd just washed. "I wanted to make sure you're all right," he said. "Today was a lot." "I'm all right. Better than all right." She stepped back, inviting him in. He hesitated, then entered, careful to leave the door slightly ajar for propriety's sake, even though propriety was kind of pointless now. "Any regrets?" he asked. Clara considered the question honestly. "Ask me after the court case. If we win, no regrets. If we lose, we won't lose." His certainty was absolute. That judge is going to see a legally married couple providing a stable home for a thriving child. He's going to see Jacob's petition for exactly what it is, spite disguised as concern, and he's going to rule in our favor. "You can't know that." "I know we've got truth on our side. That has to count for something." Clara moved to him, reached up to touch his face. "Thank you for all of this, for marrying me, for fighting for Lily, for everything." Caleb caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "You're my wife now. Fighting for you is what I do." The words settled into Clara's bones, solid and sure. She rose on her toes and kissed him, meaning it to be brief, but it deepened quickly, his arms coming around her, her hands fisting in his shirt. They kissed like people who'd been holding back and finally had permission, heat building between them until Caleb groaned and pulled away. "We should stop," he said, breathing hard. "Before I forget, we've got a child in the next bed and thin walls." Clara laughed shakily. Probably wise. He kissed her forehead, gentle and chaste. 3 weeks. After the court case is settled and we're home and everything's official, then we'll figure out the rest of this. Is that a promise? That's a guarantee. He stepped back, putting safe distance between them. "Sleep well, Mrs. Rowan." "You too, Mr. Rowan." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and Clara stood in the empty room with her lips still tingling and her heart racing, and the absolute certainty that she'd just married the right man for all the wrong reasons that were somehow becoming all the right reasons after all. 3 weeks until the court case. 3 weeks to prepare their defense, gather their evidence, steel themselves for the fight. 3 weeks until they found out if love and partnership and honest commitment were enough to stand against the judgment of a world that preferred its morality simple and its families conventional. Clara touched the ring on her finger and made a silent vow. Whatever that judge decided, whatever Jacob Hayes claimed, whatever the town gossips believed, she would fight for this family they'd built from broken pieces. She would fight, and she would win, because she'd already lost everything once. She wasn't about to let it happen again. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and clear, the kind of April day that promised spring but still tasted of winter. Clara dressed carefully in the bedroom of the Silver Peak boarding house where they'd stayed the night before, her hands trembling as she buttoned the good navy dress she'd worn for the wedding. The ring on her finger caught the light, solid proof of legitimacy, or so they hoped. Lily sat on the bed watching her mother with solemn eyes. The child had been quiet since they'd arrived in town yesterday, sensing the gravity of what was coming even if she didn't fully understand it. "Am I going to have to talk to the judge?" Lily asked. Clara turned from the mirror, forcing her voice steady. "I don't know, baby. Maybe. But if you do, all you have to do is tell the truth. Can you do that?" "I can tell the truth. The truth is I like living with you and Papa Caleb, and I don't want to live with Uncle Jacob because he's mean." "That's exactly right." Clara crossed to the bed and smoothed her daughter's hair. "And no matter what happens today, I want you to remember that I love you more than anything in this world. You understand?" Lily nodded, her small face serious beyond her years. "I love you too, Mama. And Papa Caleb loves us both, I can tell." The certainty in her daughter's voice made Clara's throat tight. Out of the mouths of babes, her own mother used to say, children saw truth that adults spent lifetimes trying to rationalize away. A knock at the door announced Caleb's arrival. He stood in the hallway dressed in his best clothes, dark trousers, white shirt, vest, coat, looking uncomfortable but determined. His eyes found Clara's and held. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be." "Then let's go show them what a real family looks like." The courthouse was a two-story brick building at the center of town, imposing and official. A crowd had already gathered on the steps, curious townspeople drawn by gossip, Mrs. Lansing and her auxiliary ladies wearing expressions of righteous vindication and standing apart from everyone, Jacob Hayes. Clara's brother-in-law hadn't changed much in the months since Thomas's funeral. Still thin and hard-faced, still wearing that expression of perpetual dissatisfaction that made him look like he'd bitten into something sour. He watched their approach with cold calculation, his eyes moving from Clara to Caleb to Lily with predatory assessment. "Clara," he said, his voice carrying across the courthouse steps. "I see you found another man to support you. How convenient." Caleb's hand went to Clara's elbow, steadying. "Mr. Hayes, I suggest you save your opinions for the courtroom." "Oh, I will. I've got plenty to say about my brother's widow shacking up with a stranger and dragging my niece into immorality." "Your niece," Caleb said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "is healthy, happy, and loved, which is more than she'd be under your care from what I've heard." Jacob's face flushed. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you threw out a starving woman and child the day after your brother's funeral. That tells me everything I need to know." Before Jacob could respond, the courthouse doors opened and a bailiff appeared. "Court's in session, family matter of Hayes versus Hayes, Judge Morrison presiding. All parties inside." They filed into a courtroom that smelled of old wood and older secrets. Judge Morrison sat behind an elevated bench, a man in his 60s with iron gray hair and the stern expression of someone who'd seen humanity at its worst and retained very little faith in its better nature. He looked up as they entered, his eyes scanning the participants with practiced assessment. "This is the custody matter?" he asked the bailiff. "Yes, Your Honor. Jacob Hayes petitioning for guardianship of Lily Hayes, currently in custody of her mother Clara Hayes." The bailiff paused, consulting his notes. "Now, Clara Rowan, as of 5 days ago." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "Recent marriage?" "Yes, Your Honor," Caleb said, standing. "To me, Caleb Rowan." "I see. And when was this marriage contracted, relative to receiving notice of these proceedings?" "After, Your Honor. But the relationship predates the custody petition. Mrs. Rowan has been employed at my ranch for 2 months as housekeeper and domestic help. We formalized our arrangement when it became clear that malicious gossip was being used to paint her as unfit." Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Malicious gossip or legitimate concern about moral propriety?" "With respect, Your Honor, I'd say the difference is in the motivation. If Mr. Hayes was genuinely concerned about his niece's welfare, he might have offered help when the child was starving in this very town. Instead, he waited until she was thriving to suddenly claim guardianship rights." "That's a lie," Jacob shot to his feet. "I came to the funeral. I offered Clara assistance." "You told her she'd made her bed and could lie in it," Clara said quietly, finding her voice. "You called my daughter a mistake to her face. Those were your exact words, Jacob. Thomas's mistakes. Plural. As if Lily and I were both errors you wished undone." Jacob's face went red. "I was grief-stricken. I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," Clara cut him off, years of suppressed anger rising to the surface. "You've hated me since the day Thomas married me instead of the banker's daughter you'd picked out for him. You saw his death as an opportunity to finally be rid of me, and when I survived anyway, when I found a way to keep my daughter fed and safe, you couldn't stand it." "This isn't about Lily's welfare. It's about punishing me for having the audacity to live." "Your Honor," Jacob sputtered, "you can see how she is. Emotional, irrational, clearly unfit." "I see a mother defending her child," Judge Morrison said dryly, "which is considerably more than I saw in your petition, Mr. Hayes. Sit down." Jacob sat, his jaw working with fury. The judge turned to Clara. "Mrs. Rowan, I've read the petition against you. The claims are serious: moral corruption, improper cohabitation, endangerment of a minor through exposure to illicit relationships. How do you answer these charges?" Clara stood, Caleb rising beside her in silent support. "Your Honor, 3 months ago my husband died of lung fever, leaving me with no income, no home, and a 4-year-old daughter to feed. The mining company evicted us. The town offered prayers but no practical help. I tried to find work, any work, and was turned away from every business because no one would hire a woman with a child in tow. She paused, gathering her courage. By the time Mr. Rowan found us, Lily hadn't eaten in 3 days. She was dying, Your Honor. Actually dying. And he was the only person in this entire town who looked at a starving child and chose to help instead of judge. So he gave you employment? He gave us survival. Food, shelter, honest work for honest wages. He treated us with respect and dignity when everyone else treated us like burdens, or worse. And yes, we lived on the same property, me and Lily in a separate cabin, Mr. Rowan in the main house. Completely separate living quarters with completely appropriate boundaries. Until you married him 5 days ago. Until I married him, yes. Because people like Mrs. Lansing, Clara gestured to where the woman sat in the gallery, her face pinched with disapproval, decided that a widow working for wages must be doing something immoral, and they weaponized their suspicions to threaten my custody. So we made it legal. We made it so that no one could question our arrangement or use gossip to tear my daughter away from the only stable home she's known in months. Judge Morrison turned to Caleb. Mr. Rowan, why did you marry this woman? Caleb stood straighter. Because I love her, Your Honor, and I love her daughter. They brought life back to a house that had been dead for 4 years, gave me purpose beyond just surviving, made me remember what it felt like to be part of a family. The marriage might have been accelerated by legal necessity, but the feelings behind it are real. Convenient feelings, Jacob muttered. Nothing convenient about it, Caleb shot back. Love is complicated and messy, and it doesn't follow timelines that make sense to outsiders. But it's real, and it's built on respect and partnership and shared purpose, which is more than most marriages can claim. The judge was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, I'd like to speak with the child. Alone, in my chambers. Mrs. Rowan, Mr. Rowan. You'll wait here. Mr. Hayes, you as well. Clara's heart seized. Your Honor, she's only 4, which is why I'll speak with her privately, without adults pressuring her to say what they want to hear. His voice softened slightly. I'm not here to frighten her, Mrs. Rowan. I'm here to determine what's in her best interest. That requires hearing from her directly. Caleb's hand found Clara's, squeezing tight. Clara looked down at Lily, who was watching the proceedings with wide eyes. Baby, the judge wants to talk to you in his office. Just you and him. Is that all right? Lily looked at the judge, considering. Then she nodded. Will you ask me about Uncle Jacob? Morrison's lips twitched. I might. Would you tell me the truth? Always. Mama says lying is wrong and cowards do it. Your mama is a wise woman. The judge stood. Come along, young lady. This won't take long. Lily slid off her seat and crossed to the judge with the fearless confidence of a child who'd learned that not all strange men were dangerous. Morrison took her small hand in his large one and led her through a door behind the bench. The moment they disappeared, Clara's legs gave out. Caleb caught her, guiding her back to her seat, his arms solid around her shoulders. She'll be fine, he murmured. She's smart and honest, and she knows her own mind. Morrison will see that. What if he doesn't? What if he decides a blood relative has more right than the people who actually love and care for her? No judge worth his position would make that call. But Jacob was smiling, small and mean, like he knew something they didn't. 10 minutes passed like hours. Clara sat rigid in her seat, Caleb beside her radiating protective fury, Jacob fidgeting with false confidence, the gallery whispering speculation. Mrs. Lansing looked grimly satisfied, clearly convinced that justice would align with her definition of morality. Finally, the door opened. Lily emerged first, skipping across the courtroom to Clara with a smile that made Clara's heart stutter with relief. Judge Morrison followed more slowly, his expression giving nothing away. Everyone sit, he commanded, returning to the bench. I've heard from the child. Now I'll hear closing arguments. Mr. Hayes, you first. Jacob stood, smoothing his vest with nervous hands. Your Honor, Lily is my brother's daughter, my blood. I can provide her a stable home in town, proper schooling, exposure to church and community and civilized society. With Clara, with Mrs. Rowan, she's isolated in the mountains with a man of questionable character, No access to education or social development, living in conditions that may be materially adequate but are morally compromised. A child needs more than food and shelter. She needs propriety, guidance, the influence of respectable people. I can give her that. They cannot. He sat down, looking pleased with himself. Judge Morrison turned to Clara and Caleb. Your response? Clara stood, her voice shaking but determined. Your Honor, my daughter needs love. She needs safety. She needs to be seen and valued and treated like she matters. For the last 2 months, she's had all of that. She's gained weight, color in her cheeks, confidence in her voice. She laughs every day. She's learning to read and ride horses and collect eggs and 100 other skills that will serve her well, whether she grows up in the mountains or a city. Clara's voice grew stronger. Jacob talks about blood and propriety and civilization. But when Lily was starving, his blood relation didn't move him to help. His sense of propriety didn't extend to basic human decency. His civilization watched a child dying and did nothing. So forgive me if I think his sudden interest in guardianship has more to do with control than care. She looked directly at the judge. My husband and I aren't perfect. Our marriage is new and our family is unconventional, and we live in isolation that some might find uncomfortable. But we love that child with everything we have. We see her not as an obligation or a burden or a pawn in some family dispute, but as a bright, precious person who deserves every good thing this world can give her, and we'll spend the rest of our lives making sure she gets it. Clara sat down, her hands trembling. Caleb took one, held it tight. Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers before him. Then he looked up, his gaze moving from Jacob to Clara to Lily, who sat swinging her legs and humming softly to herself, unbothered by the adult drama swirling around her. I've presided over a lot of custody cases, the judge said finally. Cases where children were genuinely endangered, where parents were truly unfit, where the law had to step in to protect the vulnerable. This is not one of those cases. Jacob's face went pale. Mr. Hayes, I have no doubt your concern for your niece is genuine, but genuine concern isn't the same as genuine care. You had months to offer assistance to your brother's widow and child. You chose not to. You don't get to suddenly claim guardianship rights now that the crisis has passed and someone else has done the hard work of keeping them alive. Morrison turned to Clara. Mrs. Rowan, your marriage may have been accelerated by circumstance, but that doesn't make it illegitimate. And from what I observe speaking with your daughter, she's a healthy, happy, well-adjusted child who is clearly thriving in your care. She spoke of you and your husband with genuine affection. She described her home in detail, the horses, the chickens, her reading lessons, the quilt on her bed. Those are the observations of a child who feels safe and loved. The judge picked up his gavel. The petition for guardianship is denied. Custody of Lily Hayes, he paused. Lily Rowan, if you choose to formalize the adoption, remains with her mother, Clara Rowan, and stepfather, Caleb Rowan. This court finds no evidence of moral corruption, no evidence of endangerment, and substantial evidence of a loving, stable home environment. Case dismissed. The gavel fell with a crack that sounded like thunder. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lily turned to Clara and said, Does that mean I get to stay with you and Papa? Yes, baby. Clara pulled her daughter into her arms, tears streaming down her face. Yes, you get to stay with us forever. Caleb's arm came around them both, solid and warm, and Clara felt the last knot of fear in her chest finally release. They'd won. They'd actually won. Behind them, Jacob stood frozen in furious disbelief. Mrs. Lansing pursed her lips in disapproval. But the judge was already moving on to the next case, and the bailiff was ushering everyone out, and none of it mattered anymore because Clara's daughter was hers, legally and permanently, and no one could take her away. They walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunlight, Lily between them holding both their hands, chattering happily about going home. The crowd on the steps parted to let them through, some faces hostile, others curious, a few unexpectedly sympathetic. At the bottom of the steps, Jacob caught up to them. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and venomous. I'll appeal. I'll find a way to— You'll do nothing, Caleb cut him off, his voice like iron. The judge ruled. Your niece is happy and healthy and exactly where she belongs. If you had any decency, you'd accept that and move on. Decency? You want to talk to me about decency when you— When I what? Saved a starving child? Gave her mother honest work? Married a woman I respect and admire instead of leaving her to the mercy of people like you? Caleb stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. I know men like you, Hayes. Men who mistake cruelty for strength, who think control equals caring. You don't want Lily because you love her. You want her because you can't stand the idea of Clara having something good after your brother died. Jacob's face went purple, but he didn't respond. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't prove Caleb's point. Come on, Clara said quietly, tugging Caleb's arm. He's not worth it. Let's go home. Home. The word settled into her chest, warm and permanent. They left Silver Peak that afternoon, riding out of town with the same 3 horses but entirely different circumstances than they'd had 2 months ago. Then, Clara had been fleeing toward uncertain refuge. Now she was returning to a home she'd helped build, a family she'd chosen, a future that stretched ahead full of possibility instead of just survival. The ride to the ranch took the better part of the day, the trail climbing steadily into country that grew wilder and more beautiful with every mile. Lily dozed against Clara's chest, exhausted from the emotional intensity of the hearing. Clara held her daughter close and watched the landscape change, feeling the tension of the past weeks finally drain away. Caleb rode beside them, quiet but present, his eyes occasionally meeting Clara's with expressions that made her pulse quicken. They were married now, truly married. The legal necessity transformed into genuine partnership by the simple act of standing together against the world's judgment. What came next was theirs to decide. They reached the ranch just as the sun touched the peaks, painting everything gold and crimson. Caleb helped Clara down from Daisy, his hands lingering at her waist, and she saw the question in his eyes. Take Lily inside, he said. Get her fed and settled. I'll tend the horses. Clara nodded, gathering her sleepy daughter and carrying her into the house that smelled like pine smoke and coffee and home. She fed Lily soup and bread, bathed her in the kitchen basin, dressed her in a nightgown that had been Emma's and was slowly becoming Lily's. Mama, Lily said as Clara tucked her into the bed upstairs. Are you happy? Clara smoothed her daughter's hair, dark against white pillows. Yes, baby. I'm happy. Are you? Very happy. I like having a papa who plays with me and a house that's warm and chickens that know my voice. Lily yawned. And I like that Uncle Jacob can't take me away. No one can take you away. You're ours and we're yours, and that's forever. Forever, Lily agreed, her eyes already closing. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby, more than all the stars. Clara waited until her daughter's breathing deepened into sleep, then went back downstairs. Caleb was in the kitchen, having cleaned up from dinner, standing by the window looking out at the darkening mountains. He turned when she entered, and the expression on his face, hope and desire and uncertainty mixed together, made Clara's breath catch. She asleep? He asked. Out cold. Today exhausted her. It exhausted all of us. He moved toward her slowly, like approaching something precious that might spook. Clara, we should talk about what happens now. I know. I meant what I said about this being your choice. About the marriage being whatever you want it to be. Nothing's changed just because we won the court case. Clara crossed the distance between them and took his hands in hers. Everything's changed. We're not pretending anymore. We're not using legal protection as an excuse. We're married, Caleb. Really married. And She stopped, searching for the right words. How to explain that over the past 2 months, he'd become essential to her in ways that had nothing to do with survival. That she'd fallen in love with his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the way he treated her daughter like she was precious. I want this to be real, she said finally. All of it. The partnership, the family. I want it to be what it looks like. Not just an arrangement, but an actual marriage. If you still want that. Caleb's eyes darkened. If I still want it? Clara, I've wanted you since the first time you stood up to those town gossips with a shotgun and more courage than any 10 men. I've wanted this family since Lily asked to call me Papa and looked at me like I hung the moon. The only question is whether you're sure, because once we cross this line, there's no going back to being just business partners. I don't want to go back. I want to go forward. Clara reached up to touch his face, rough with stubble, warm with life. With you, as your wife, for real. Caleb's control broke. He pulled her against him and kissed her like a man starving, like he'd been holding back for months and finally had permission to feel everything. Clara kissed him back with equal hunger, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body pressing against his, weeks of tension and restraint finally releasing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "You're sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He swept her up in his arms, literally lifted her off her feet, and carried her toward the stairs. Clara laughed, surprised and delighted, wrapping her arms around his neck. "What about Lily?" "Lily's asleep in the back bedroom. We'll be in mine. She won't wake up, but if she does, she'll find two parents who love each other. Nothing wrong with that." He carried her into his bedroom, their bedroom now, and set her down gently beside the bed. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating his face as he looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "I love you," he said, simple and direct. "I know it's fast, I know it's probably crazy, but I love you. Not just for what you've brought to this house, but for who you are. Your strength, your courage, the way you fight for what matters. I love you, Clara." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you too. I didn't think I could, didn't think I knew how after Thomas. But you taught me. You showed me what real partnership looks like, what it means to be seen and valued and respected. I love you, Caleb Rowan." He kissed her then, tender and reverent, and slowly, carefully, they came together as husband and wife in truth. There was fumbling and awkwardness. They were still learning each other's bodies, still discovering what brought pleasure, but there was also laughter and tenderness, and a profound sense of rightness that made the physical joining feel like coming home. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight, Clara's head on Caleb's chest, his arm around her shoulders, both of them exhausted and sated and impossibly content. "Thank you," Clara whispered. "For what?" "For seeing us, for helping us, for loving us even when you had every reason to stay closed off and alone." Caleb's arm tightened around her. "Thank you for taking a chance on a broken-down rancher with more ghosts than sense, for bringing life back to this house, for giving me a reason to care about tomorrow instead of just surviving today." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when morning came, Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Lily's laughter downstairs. She dressed and went down to find her daughter sitting at the kitchen table coloring while Caleb made breakfast, the two of them chattering about the day's plans like they'd been doing this forever. Caleb looked up when Clara appeared, and the smile he gave her, private and warm and full of promise, made her heart stutter. "Morning, wife." "Morning, husband." Lily looked between them and grinned. "You look happy." "We are happy," Clara said, crossing to kiss her daughter's head before moving to help Caleb with breakfast. "Very, very happy." Spring turned to summer, and the ranch bloomed under their combined care. Clara's garden produced more vegetables than they could eat. Caleb broke 2 new horses and sold them for good money. Lily grew brown from sun and strong from mountain air, learning to read and ride and help with chores that gave her purpose. They were visited occasionally by neighbors from distant ranches, by traveling peddlers, by the circuit preacher who'd returned to Silver Peak and made the trek up to the high country to officially bless their marriage with a proper ceremony. The preacher had looked around at the thriving ranch, the healthy child, the obvious affection between husband and wife, and pronounced it one of the truest marriages he'd ever witnessed. Clara thought he might be right. By August, she was pregnant, morning sickness hitting her hard enough that Caleb insisted she rest while he took over the cooking. She'd laughed at the role reversal until she tasted his attempts at biscuits and realized maybe she should get up anyway. Lily was thrilled at the prospect of a baby brother or sister, already making plans for teaching them important things like how to collect eggs and avoid the rooster. One evening in early September, Clara stood at the kitchen window watching the sunset behind the peaks, while Caleb taught Lily to play a simple tune on the harmonica he'd found in the attic. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach, feeling the flutter of new life, and she thought about how far they'd all come. 6 months ago, she'd been dying in Silver Peak, holding her starving daughter and seeing no future beyond the next terrible day. Now she stood in a warm kitchen in a home she'd helped build, married to a man who loved her, carrying a child conceived in hope instead of obligation, watching her daughter laugh and grow and thrive. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she was 20 and full of romantic dreams about what marriage should be. It was better, because it was built on truth instead of fantasy, on partnership instead of possession, on love that had been earned through shared hardship and chosen every single day. Caleb looked up from the harmonica and caught her watching. He smiled, that private expression that was just for her, and mouthed the words, "I love you," across the room. Clara smiled back, touching the ring on her finger that had belonged to his mother and now belonged to her, symbol of a marriage that had started as survival strategy and become the truest thing in her life. "I love you too," she mouthed back. Lily hit a wrong note on the harmonica and dissolved into giggles. Caleb tickled her until she couldn't breathe from laughing. Outside, the last light faded from the peaks, and the first stars appeared in a sky so vast and clear it looked like you could reach up and touch heaven. Clara turned from the window and crossed to her family, sitting down beside them, adding her voice to their laughter and music and joy. This was home. This was family. This was everything she'd never known she needed until a man in a general store had looked at her dying daughter and chosen compassion over indifference. And standing there in the gathering dark with love surrounding her like warmth, Clara understood with perfect clarity that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as desperation. Sometimes salvation arrived wearing a stranger's face. And sometimes, just sometimes, the hunger that nearly destroyed you turned out to be exactly what you needed to find your way home.